Good morning and welcome to Our Stories. Our guest today is Carol Sudduth, and I think you'll find her story very interesting. She has had the experience as a youngster, certainly, of living in several different communities that I think you'll recognize and realize that they were very different from each other. So Carol, you grew up in three distinct communities as a youngster, living in Dayton, Ohio, Lake Forest, Illinois, and Rochester, Illinois.
Yep.
So tell us a little bit about your moves from those one place to another and what it was like.
Well, I was born in Dayton and was there because my father was in the service during the Second World War. And when I was about 2, we moved back to Lake Forest, Illinois, which was where my father had lived all his life, where my grandparents were. We lived there until I went into 3rd grade, when we went back to Dayton for the Korean War, because Dad was called back in service. We were there 18 months and then moved back to Lake Forest again. I was there until I began my junior year in high school. I don't remember much about the early time in Dayton, but in Lake Forest, my grandparents, I wasn't close to my grandparents, my father's parents. My grandfather was a chauffeur. My grandmother didn't work. They lived above the garage, and we spent a lot of time there. I think, if I remember correctly, they went to church with us, or we went to church with them. And on a lot of Sundays, we would have dinner with them. And I went to school there from kindergarten through the end of 1st grade, and then went 2nd grade in Ohio, and then went back, and from 3rd grade until in high school, I went to Lake Forest. And what I remember a lot about Lake Forest, not only the experiences with my grandparents, but the schools were really good. I learned a lot, and I remember a lot of the teachers, they were really super. In 2nd grade in Dayton, I don't remember much about going to school, except the first few months we were there, I had to walk to school as a 2nd grader, and it was probably 3/4 of a mile. It was through neighborhoods. But you walked to school. Okay, in Lake Forest, I'd ridden the school bus. And then we moved back, went through junior high and high school in Lake Forest, and then moved to Rochester. And moving to Rochester, which was at that time a tiny farming community. Most of the kids were farm people. There were a few, like myself and Will, who lived on Lake Springfield. And we rode the school bus to school, but it was almost culture shock from the level of what I was doing in Lake Forest in school to what I was doing in Rochester. From the point I was writing book reviews as a freshman in high school to move to Rochester and I'm filling out workbooks, which was quite a shock.
Sure.
Also, the culture was quite different because Lake Forest being what it was, there were a lot of blacks there. Not a lot, there were some blacks there, but they were all upper class.
Right.
And moved to Springfield, even the teachers were using language about them that were verboten. I mean, it was never mentioned in our house growing up. So that was a shock. It was different.
Yeah. So these, you went kind of in from a community where the schools were, really a lot of attention was paid to, because a lot of kids from there went to college. So, it was that kind of a prep program.
Yeah, very much so.
And that's not exactly what you were stepping into in Rochester.
No, definitely not.
Yeah. Right. So also the school bus ride there in Lake Forest had a sort of an unusual aspect to it.
Something that couldn't happen today. But and I especially remember this from 5th grade through 8th grade. One of the bus drivers was a World War I veteran, very, very active in the American Legion there in Lake Forest. His name was Mr. Gray. And Mr. Gray, at the front of his bus, had an American flag taped to the pole by his seat. And as we got to a certain point on the route, everybody was on the bus, we'd cross, there was 2 sets of railroad tracks, we'd cross the railroad tracks. And at that point, we said the Pledge of Allegiance every single morning on that school bus. I don't remember whether we stood up or not. We could have back then. You know, there were such rules, but and everybody knew Mr. Gray. Everybody loved him. He was a wonderful gentleman.
And very patriotic.
Oh, and exceedingly patriotic.
Yeah. There were several parts of your young life that had a strong impact on you, and one piece of that was the influence of your mother.
Yeah, mother was a excellent seamstress, and she tried to teach me to sew. To the point that she had classes for my friends, so I would learn. And in that respect, she didn't fail. As she said, I could sew anything I wanted to sew, but I didn't want to.
Yeah.
I did not enjoy it, which is kind of sad for her, because as an adult, by the time my mother was to the point where she couldn't see or hear, I finally found that I enjoyed sewing, but an entirely different kind of sewing.
Yeah. There was also a family tradition that they were very committed to, and one that you believe really enriched your life, about the importance of vacations in your household.
Yep, we went on a vacation. I don't remember when they started, but we went on a vacation every year, just about every year. And as we're driving along, and he'd see a sign, tour the China factory. So we toured the China factory. Tour the paper mill. So we toured the paper mill. Tour the fabric making factory. And we went there. If there was a sign as to something that you could tour, all the way down to sewage plants and paper making factories, where the smell was not great.
Yeah.
But we toured. If there was a tour, we toured it. And I learned a lot of stuff, not because they were intentionally teaching it to us, but because I was exposed to it.
Right. So you finished high school there in Rochester and then enrolled at Millikan. And you were telling me how your roommate had quite a strong influence on you. So what was there about your roommate that made her so special?
She had been a foster child. She lived with a family that were older. The man died when she was, I think, in 6th grade, something like that. But they allowed her to stay with the family, which was unusual.
Yeah.
But they were never adopted her because they were older. And also, she got a full ride to Millikan because she was under the auspices of the Illinois Children's Home, and they paid for her education. So she was a very intelligent person, and very smart. She didn't think she was, but she was. And we'd have discussions about a lot of things, history, religion. And when I started college, I was a person that was probably believed everything was either black or white. I mean, there was no middle ground. And I'd say she opened my eyes to, or she'd question, and made me realize that, you know, the world is not just
there might be
this
other
or
ways
this.
of thinking about
Yes,
that.
right, yes.
Yeah.
And so in that way, she was a big influence on my life. And she stayed a big influence. She became the godmother of my older son. And they had a special connection, which always was very important to me because a lot of times he and I rubbed each other the wrong way, as parent and child will.
Right.
But they could talk, and she would listen, and they had a special relationship, which was wonderful as far as I was concerned. I mean, I suppose some people might have been jealous of that kind of relationship, but I thought it was great.
And then at Millikan, you developed a relationship with Professor Dr. Shelton. Tell us about that and how that came about and what kind of responsibilities you wound up with there.
When I first got to Millikan, at that point, to register for classes, you went in this big room with all these desks and went around and well, what do you want to do? I don't really know what I want to do. Well, what are you interested in? Well, I kind of enjoy math, so, well, go see Dr. Shelton. So they pointed me to him, and I registered for classes. I was in his class. It's one of four math professors I had while I was there, but I had him the most. And I really enjoyed the class, but I got to know a gal who was a senior, who at that point was Dr. Shelton's student secretary. And toward the end of the year, she came up to me and she says, you know, I'm graduating. Would you be interested in becoming Dr. Shelton's secretary? Sure, why not? Gave me a little income for Sunday night suppers and that kind of thing. And I liked him. He was the type of person that his desk could be piled 6 feet deep in all kinds of stuff. And if you went in and had a problem, it was like, let's clear the desk. What can we talk about? How can I help you? He was just a wonderful person. So I worked for him for 3 years. The third year, when I was a senior, I was a junior. It was my second year working for him. My roommate was in a class called Finite Math, and I was the student assistant. I took attendance, I graded the homework papers, and that kind of thing. And it came time for the end of the semester, and he looked at me and he says, could you type the final? Yeah. And he let me take the final back to my room and type it there on my typewriter, which I was familiar with, knowing that my roommate was in that class. He knew her a little bit, he knew me. I thought that is the height of trust, to be allowed to do that, and knowing that we weren't going to do any cheating, we weren't going to do anything we shouldn't do.
So now I want to backtrack a little bit here. When you were in high school, you said that you and Will rode the same bus to and from school, and you knew each other, and that he also drove you and your sister to after-school rehearsals. But you guys didn't date.
We had one date in high school because his mother suggested, why don't you call Carol and go to a movie? So we did. But that was it. When we were juniors, I went to the prom with his best friend, and he went to the prom with my best friend, and we double dated. But no, we didn't date. The weekend before we both left for college, he called and asked me to go to a movie. Okay, we went to a movie. So as he's leaving, he said, well, you want to do something tomorrow evening? I said, well, the Miss America's contest's on. I want to see that, which I know he does not enjoy. And he says, oh, yeah. He says, you want to come over and we'll watch them? So we did. He came over and we watched the Miss America pageant. And then as he's leaving, he says, can I write you? Yeah. So he wrote me, and it came time for homecoming where he was going to school and at Millikan. And so he invited me down to homecoming. It was, at that point, it was Rolla School of Mines. Names changed several times. But so I went, and 2 weeks later he came back to the Millikan for my homecoming, and then we went out and saw The Sound of Music at Thanksgiving time and decided to get engaged.
So you got engaged, and then you got married, and then Will went into service.
Yeah, he had been in ROTC in school, and it was Vietnam, so it wasn't if you were going to Vietnam, it was when you were going, and we knew that when we got married.
Yeah. You know, he served in Vietnam and then came back, and then at that point, you guys relocated here.
Well, I came here because he had a job waiting for him here. He had been here 6 months and worked, and had a job to come back to. So we had lived here for 6 months, so I had an apartment, and I just lived here, and I worked. At that point, I took a job at, I started out at Centennial for 6 weeks, and then I transferred to Thomas Jefferson and taught Thomas Jefferson. I was there 2 years. So we came back to Decatur because he had a job here.
And then when you came back after his tour to Vietnam, you started coming to church here.
Well, I started coming to church here when I was a freshman at Millikan. First Pres sent taxis to Millikan every Sunday morning and picked up the students and brought them down to First Pres. So I had been here, and after I'd been here as a freshman for a couple months, Kathy said, because she liked music and I liked music, she says, "You want to be in the choir?" So we came and we joined the choir. When the weather was good, we'd walk. When the weather wasn't good, Paul Rosenberger came and picked us up and drove us to choir on Thursday nights, because we practiced Thursday nights back then. But so I was in the choir here and had been at that point for several years.
Yeah.
So the choir was very important to me. So when he came back from overseas, I says, "All right, where we're going to go to church?" And he says, "Well, I want to look around." And I told him, "Okay, that's fine. I know where I want to go." I was part of the choir here. I was coming back here. And I did. I've been here ever since. When our kids were young, elementary school age, I don't think they were in junior high yet, Will and I served as advisors to the youth group. At that point, there was a pretty active youth group. So we did that. I've been a deacon. Now I'm on session.
You've been on Boku committees.
Oh, yeah, well, a few committees, and I'm real involved in the prayer shawl group.
So what do you think are the main things that have kept you here over the years?
Music. The music is wonderful. When Will left, I went to the church with him a couple times, and I couldn't do it. I had to come back for the music. That's so important. When there have been times when, I gotta go to choir practice tonight. But by the time I went home, I felt so good.
Sure.
It was so uplifting and so supportive. And then I have a whole lot of friends here that are very important to me. So I'd say that why I'm here is music. That's the main reason.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for giving us the overview of your life in and around here and getting here. So thank you so much for sharing.
You're welcome.